And we are live, and we are here with Inon Shampanier from Paper Spiders. He's the director and co-writer of Paper Spiders. I'm just going to wait for people to trickle in so that I'm not talking into the air here. And I will start with my little opening spiel because I think it's such a fascinating film that you've made here. And someone that was watching it texted 15 minutes in, and they said, I already love and care about these characters so much. Please ask them how they managed to do this in an opening act. So, and in fact, yesterday we had Adam on for Dinner in America, which is a really awesome film. And I think he had said the pragmatic advice was, if something is wrong with your film, it's probably in the first act. Yeah. So I never really completely heard that before, but the more I think about it, the opening act problems are something. So I want to talk with you about what has happened with this film, your response, why you made it, how it was working with your wife, and this writing team, and how that symbiotic relationship happened. I also, of course, want to talk about the fact that the film will be releasing very soon, and people will be able to see it. And I also want to talk about the activism element of the film, because it's art, but there's a real tangible grasp point to it. So first, tell us where you are and how your lockdown has been going. We generally try to avoid the P word or even talking about lockdowns, but something gives me an idea that you're the type of person that has utilized this time well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, a pleasure being here, even virtually. So, yeah. We're excited for this Canadian premiere, and really grateful that the festival is making it possible for people to see movies, despite the fact that we're all isolated and that the world has turned more virtual than ever, which is very interesting. I mean, this is obviously a process that has been in the works for years, even pandemic aside. I said the P word. But obviously, I mean, the past year has made it even so much more so. And still, I mean, we're grateful for the fact that we can connect with audiences and mostly thanks to festivals now until the release. So we're really grateful for the opportunity. So thank you for showing the film and also shedding a light on the subject, which as you mentioned, there was a big part of it that is very close to our hearts. My wife and I, Natalie, we always write together, but this project specifically was closer to our hearts than other projects that we've written before. Sadly, it's inspired by truth and inspired by my wife's story with her mother, who was really a wonderful woman, and it was very sweet and very funny and very loving, and had a wonderful relationship with my wife. But she was a victim of delusional disorder. It just happened to her. It could have been, and it's this lottery of biology where you can be hit with cancer, with diabetes, or with mental illness, and it's very difficult to deal with someone who has some form of mental illness, especially when they're completely not aware of the fact that they have it. So it's a very difficult. I mean, first of all, it's an excruciating experience for the person going through it. The saddest thing of all was the fact that she was living in a nightmare, and if it wasn't real, in her reality, she was being tormented daily, and her family wasn't helping her. So that was very, very sad. But also from the point of view of a person who cares for a loved one who is going through it, it was very, very difficult. And that question is of what do you do when someone that you love is struggling with a problem that is so much greater than your own? And of course, in this story very specifically, we're dealing with paranoia, but it might as well be any other form of mental illness or addiction, which is just really painful. And we felt like there's something about this narrative that is really about love. There's someone that you love and you try to help, and it hurts the relationship, and it's not really their fault, but it's beyond your control. So there was something that was really close to our hearts, and as filmmakers, we just process our the things that we care about into our screenplays. So and this was something that we really cared about. but we're also very secretive about it when we're going through it. So we didn't even tell, close friends about it. And then when we wrote the screenplay, we told ourselves, we don't really need to mention that it's based on anything true. But then we started showing it to people, even in script form. And every other person we showed it to said, this is like my story with, my sibling who's dealing with an addiction, who's dealing with this form of mental illness, who's dealing with, and we realized, wow, this is so relatable. And people started opening up to us, and we felt compelled to open up to them. And we realized that there's really a lot of value to talking about it, because there's a lot of unnecessary shame that is attached to mental illness. And very often it prevents people from seeking help or talking about it, or even, exploring all the resources, which sometimes you learn about just from talking to people. For example, we're very lucky to have the support of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness in the US, the largest nonprofit in the US for mental illness. And maybe if we had known, actually, my wife is also a marriage and family therapist, so it was very clear to her from the get-go that, what her mother was going through was paranoid delusions. But still, if we had known about all the resources that NAMI are offering, maybe we would have been able to do something different. So there's a lot of value to having a conversation, and that's very often prevented, by not talking about it. So that answers one question.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, we as programmers have seen a lot of films that we would classify as activist films, or activism for something, and that's really what activism is. It's raising awareness about a cause, and I must admit that some of them lose the art in service of the activism, and some of them lose the activism in service of the art. And one thing I would say about this film is, we have hashtag story over everything, of course. And that means many things to many different people. But one of the things is that how you tell a story, craft, the arcs, the specifics is really like what I'm saying is the cinema specifics of how you tell a story is just as important as the story you're trying to tell, because of how ultimately it has to connect with an audience, because the questions at the heart of this film are very interesting, I think. And also, I think that for the conversation that you want to happen to actually happen, people must be hit.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one thing about your film. It's quite funny.
Yeah, thank you.
and I don't mean that in any way that's wrong. I think this is a conversation that we've had with a few directors who've used humor as a means of disarming somebody, because I've looked up your filmography, and just by watching this film, I can tell that maybe from the first 3-4 scenes that are in the hands of somebody who really, really understands purely cinema. So I'm wondering how consciously was the decision to make the funny parts funny, and was it to disarm somebody just so you could punch them in the gut a little bit?
Well, first of all, I think that having lived through it, we and really knowing how sad the subject matter is, having lived through, what you see in the movie for an hour and a half, we've lived through for several years. And it was very sad. At times, it was ridiculous. And there are a lot of things that didn't go into the script, but at times it was ridiculous. I would say that maybe the neurosis was funny until it became psychosis, and then it was very unfunny. But beyond that, when we started having a conversation, and I remember having to with my wife, who's naturally a very funny person and very good with comedy and character comedy. We started saying, maybe this is something we should put into script form. We said, wow, this could be a very, very sad movie. And we felt like we have to sweeten the bitter pill, and we have to find a way to make this more palatable. Because if it were just, pure 100%, struggle and heartbreak, it would be a very tough watch. And I think that in a way, it was more disarming, not so much for the sense of hitting the audience with, just with the impact of it when you don't expect it. But I think that there's a certain truth to it that, life, we don't live in a genre. And our lives, life has a lot of humor and a lot of, surprising tones. that are just life. And we felt like there's actually, even with my wife's mom, she was a very funny woman. She was kind of quirky, and there was a lot of comedy in life with her. And we felt like you would actually be even more truthful. And the relationship, which is kind of loving, I mean, the mother-daughter relationship is very loving and very close and enmeshed. And that's a relationship that naturally has a lot of comedy to it. It does in the movie, and it did in real life. And it's even more heartbreaking when we lose that. We lose the comedy, and we lose that relationship, and we get to feel what it is. So I would say that in a way, we felt like it would intensify the impact. But it also, yeah, it was a way to tell the story that is in a way that we thought would be more palatable rather than just pure heartbreak. Thank you for noticing that.
Oh, of course, and I think that's a really important part of it. So, I do want to ask you. You've mentioned your wife a few times. Of course, how is the process like of collaborating on a story that is effectively, in a lot of ways, so personal for her? And so, what is the dynamic like? Because I'm always interested to understand. We had. Do you know Javier Fesser? Javier Fesser. Okay, yeah. So Javier and Guillermo Fesser, they're brothers, and they are directing this short Invisible Monster together, which is an activism film at Pendance. And I thought it was just so fascinating to understand how the dynamic is between them, because Guillermo was very, very like, I'm the person who deals with the people. He is the person who deals with the camera. Like, this is how we complement each other. So how do you and your wife complement each other this way?
It's interesting. I think that my wife is more of a comedy writer, and I'm more of a thriller writer. And so we meet halfway with dramas. But actually, I mean, every other script we write is completely different. We kind of reinvent or just find different things that we're interested in with every project. And every project has its own evolution, but we just really enjoy brainstorming. We always feel like the majority of the work is just brainstorming. I mean, the writing is probably, I would say it's probably 80% talking about it and 20% writing. So when we talk and brainstorm, it's so convenient to bounce ideas off of each other. And very often, if one of us is really excited about an idea and the other one isn't, there's a reason. So we definitely challenge each other and improve the work as a result. This was a little bit different because it was personal, but we also went through it together. So we definitely were totally on the same wavelength when it came to what the story is about. There was no question. Very often, I feel like with screenplays, the first step once we start putting together a general idea of the plot, we ask ourselves, what is this movie really about? Beyond just the plot, what do we really want to say? And very often that's a really interesting journey, I'm sure, for you too as a filmmaker. I mean, asking yourself that very major question, which seems like the most basic one, and yet very often it's very hard to pin down in words. And this, in that regard, was a little easier. That from day one we knew what the movie is about, so we knew what we wanted to do with it. Whereas with some projects, we toy around with different ideas. And so yeah, I mean that the process was very enjoyable in that regard, even though it was also sad. Even filming the movie. I mean, we've had some some tears on set. From crew and my wife too. I mean, just watching certain moments come to life, like the homeless Sally. It's just the police scene. It's just, it touches on something very real. And above all, we're just so grateful that we had, wonderful actors, and especially lead actresses in the movie, and they really put their hearts and souls into the roles, and I think that it really shows. They gave it their all, and even for us watching them, I mean, we're awed by the commitment that they had for the roles. So and they developed a mother-daughter relationship that which you always know when you cast good actors, that they're going to perform, but you can never really know what kind of a relationship they're going to develop on screen together if they haven't worked together before. And so very often, I mean, you have great actors, but they just like the chemistry together. And Lily and Stefania didn't know each other before, so we didn't know what kind of a relationship they'll develop, but they developed such a beautiful relationship off screen and also on screen. And it really gave the relationship in the movie a reality that I hope was very convincing.
I think it was, and I think just from meeting you for now 15 minutes, I can tell that you might be the type of director that an actor might feel very comfortable giving that type of performance for, because I've found this to be a recurring theme throughout Pendance, that when we see this film on screen, we try to imagine what, what kind of person could have done this, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
What kind of person could have thought of this idea? What kind of person could have thought of this arc? What kind of person could have enlisted the help of so many creative collaborators and gotten them to invest in it? What kind of person could have made an actor feel secure to perform a certain scene? Because I think you would probably be able to speak to this, that if the trust is lost, and if there's not a sincere buy-in from the actor, then the types of performances that you've gotten from your two leads aren't really possible. So how do you cultivate that trust? I feel weird asking you this, because I feel like, naturally, like, there's a very trustworthiness to you. But yeah.
It's really, again, which I'm sure you know as a filmmaker, it's really just about a connection and having the real and genuine connection, or maybe not just about that, but that's the beginning of it. And we're lucky that the actors knew that we know what we're talking about. I mean, there was a subject that was very close to our hearts, and they felt it in the screenplay, and they felt it when we discussed it. So it always helps. I mean, with projects that are not based on our own personal reality, I mean, we always try to do all the research necessary so that we come to set with all the answers. So the actors don't ask, "Oh, why is my character doing that?" And we're like, "We just thought it would be cool," So we try to we try to always make sure that we know what we're talking about, and do the homework. But this time specifically, I think that they really responded to the material on a personal level, and when we had conversations about it, they're very genuine and very open, and you want to make sure that you really communicate the heart of the matter, especially when there is a heart. Some projects don't have that much of a heart, but in this case there was one, and Lily and Stefania and all the other actors were just really genuinely in love with the project and were proud of doing it. So it was very, very easy. And honestly, I feel like what they always say, directing is 90% casting, or directing actors 90% casting, and it's so true. I mean, when you cast great actors and they're right for the roles, I mean, you can just kind of sit back and watch them. I mean, you need to create the right circumstances and the right environment around them. And I think that a lot of it has to know with when in a movie that still wants to be cinematic and not just a work of activism. And then obviously story is the most important thing, as well as style. When do you want to be a little bit more stylized, and when is it important for you that the actors, are understand, what you're trying to do with the cinematography and with the visual storytelling, and when you need to step back and be like, okay, our job right now, we're lighting this maybe not 360, but as much as we can, and you just need to do what you need to do, and we'll make sure to, it's on us to try to be there and capture all the gems that you're throwing at us. And I would say the police scene was in the movie was an example for that. It was a scene that still needed to not be controlled. There was also some improvisation there. There was also some, and we felt like it needed to be messy. We knew that we were going to go handheld. We knew that I didn't want to have the actors, step into marks and be worried about the composition, whether or not they hit their mark. Instead, like the right line, since they knew the text and they knew the moment, and also we built toward it. It was the end of the second week of shooting. We shot for 4 weeks. It was a 20-day shoot, so 5 days and a week, and so this was the end of the second week. So we just spent 10 days working up to that moment, more or less, even though we obviously shot out of order, more or less with scenes that were gradually working toward that moment. And so when it happened, there was already so much built up and such a relationship. And so it was very, I mean, we've had crew members behind us, tear up as they're doing the scene. And it was just so powerful that we just knew we're just going to capture, whatever it is that they give us, and we're going to make sure that the cameras work around them rather than they work themselves toward the cameras, because they just needed to really be in that moment for a long period of time. and just go with it and kind of see what happens. And then as a director, I think that you just try to fine tune the moment. And if you feel like at some points maybe there isn't enough conflict, or you feel like in what moment is an actor maybe struggling with the text, or maybe, or sometimes I would say for Natalie and me, we tend to be very precise is maybe the wrong word, but we tend to write just enough. We tend to not overwrite. So very often a scene on paper tells you everything you need to know in those 5 lines and moving on. But then you see it performed and you're like, oh wow, in 5 lines it feels like we just started to explore it. So suddenly you want the actors to improvise more, you want the actors to add more, but it's not their job to come up on the spot with great lines. And they may not have them ready, or they may not. So you go back to the basics of, okay, what is the intent? And so you tell one actor, okay, for example, like I remember the scene when Dawn leaves the house to go live in her car. The scene that we wrote on paper was just too brief, and when we filmed it, it was just over very quickly, and it felt like we didn't really get to sink our teeth into the meat of the scene. So I remember, telling Lily and Stefania, who, were perfect from the first take, but I said, I told Lily, you have to leave, you can't stay in the house. And I told Stefania, you can't let her leave, you can't let her leave the house. If you leave the house, you lose her. So it just goes back to, you have like 2 conflicting objectives, you create, conflict, and then, you just let both actors just try to stop the other person, or do the opposite, and you create, conflict and an interesting scene. So, yeah. So that was a very long answer for a short question. But,
I love it. You mentioned a couple of times tears on set, right? I've been on heavy sets before, where the subject matter is heavy and personal, and I felt when I leave that set that I've been carrying like a ton of bricks on my back, and I need to just go sleep because there's an emotional exhaustion that occurs. So how conscious are you of that? And how do you keep it lighter so that people don't burn out? Because emotionally, these performances, especially for the actors, must be so exhausting. So how are you handling, how long your days are, where you're segmenting breaks? Do you have a pulse on, hey, this is, this was a really tough scene. Let's move to something lighter than, or maybe even you pre-structure this in your shot list that we're not going to do 2 massive things, or maybe we're only going to do the heavy thing at the end right there, and we're going to give everyone a break, something like that.
That's a really good question, because it's such an important one, and it's not one that people often discuss. And it really came down, as you suggested, to scheduling. I mean, obviously, everyone goes through their own processes, and for the actors, they also, I'm sure, did a lot of personal work to try to, deal with the emotional burden of the story. But just in terms of scheduling alone, it was crucial to us that even though we shot out of order and we're dependent on location and on days of rain, that of course, whenever we thought it would rain, it didn't rain. Whenever we thought that it wouldn't rain, and then at exterior scenes, it rained and everything changed. But still, we try to make sure that that we're working towards the heavy scenes. And we didn't want to have any of the heavy scenes, like the first week. We just felt like, they wanted as much as we can to let the relationship build. Even though we shot out of order and we jumped around, and know that the big scenes, the important scenes, need their time, and they need to happen at the right time. And I think that it's really important to not exhaust your actor emotionally before doing those scenes, and not have them jump around too much in terms of the jumping between light comedic scenes and heavy dramatic scenes. They need to be in the mindset of working the story, and beyond that, I think that it's a very basic duty of the director, but one that's often overlooked, to really remind the actors just where we are in the story as they jump, as they do like all their wardrobe changes, and just where we are in the story right now, and just remember that in the scene before, which we haven't shot, we're only going to shoot a week from now, but that's how the scene ended. And maybe that scene on the page seems like it wasn't that serious, but it was a very heavy moment. So you're actually coming to the scene frustrated about something else. So now they know where they are in the story, especially when you shoot out of order. So I would say that scheduling is a huge part of that. And beyond that, I think being sensitive to what actors are going through. I really hope that I was as sensitive, as I could be. I mean, our actors were wonderful and really put their heart into it. And sometimes you don't quite know if the tears are all just performance or if they're really like living through it in the most, but also as a director, you're concerned with just, running the set and making sure that everything is ticking. And you really want to make sure that the actors feel, cared for, and that that it's not too much of an emotional burden when you're dealing with things like that.
We'll have little audience questions in the middle that come through. Here's Boyana. Your pacing is absolutely fantastic and totally on point. How do you achieve the pacing?
First of all, thank you very much. I'm glad you felt that way. I think that when we write, we're very conscious of tension. Where does the tension come from? And for us as screenwriters, tension comes from expectation. So as long as we know what the problem is and what the character expects or wants to solve, we feel like there's dramatic tension. And then usually when the character has some kind of a plan or some kind of an idea of what she's trying to do. As a matter of fact, I would say one of the challenges that we've had with the story was that it could seem that Stefania's character, that Melanie, wasn't very active. She was, to some extent, a little passive. Like, what can I do about your mom? We're trying to make sure that we kept having something for her to try to do, even if she fails, just to keep, especially the second act, keep it alive. And then beyond that, I think Joe Murphy did a fantastic job, and to really keep things tight. And then just try to get reactions from people when you cut it, and see if there's any point where the tension drops. But fortunately, the movie's almost identical to the script. I mean, in terms of the scenes, we didn't really do any creative, cutting around. We didn't reinvent the story. We didn't rewrite the story in the editing room.
You've mentioned how personal this felt to you. I'm curious, is it possible for a story to be too personal to actually tell? Because it's important. I want to explain that I think that it's important that a filmmaker care about the story that they're telling, that they have a point, that they have a vision, that they have an end point of what I want the audience to feel. But at some point, can you care too much about a subject? To the point where you really can't even make a film about it? And how are you able to navigate that line? Because I think sometimes filmmakers become too obsessed with a certain point that they're trying to make, whatever, and they're not really able to see it from the eyes of the audience. But you obviously have been able to. So explain how you're able to filter out that need to tell the story in order to tell the story really well, that it can connect. I'm sorry if that's not clear, but
it's very clear, and it's actually a really good question. I would say that of all the festival panels that we've had, these are some of the best questions and most insightful questions that we've been asked. I definitely think that a subject matter could be too personal, especially by virtue of something that is not fully processed, especially when it's something that you're still going through. And I can think of other things in our lives that we've gone through or are going through, which we're probably still in the process of processing them, that we're probably not ready to put them into script form. Things that we've discussed, maybe one day turning into a story, into a movie, and we felt like we're not there yet. We're still living the story. We're still processing the experience. We're still not ready to really tell a story about it. So I think that you do need some perspective, and you need to have processed the material yourself as a filmmaker. And I think that you do need to be able to step back and treat it as a story. and ask yourself, why would that be interesting to someone? It's very easy for a filmmaker to fall in love with their own work and just feel like this would be so amazing and powerful to everyone. But the reality is very often, you don't get that feedback from people. So, I mean, then, as always, it's so important to test the screenplay on other people, see how they feel about it, see if it touches them or not, if they feel what you're feeling about it, if the emotions are communicated, and process it yourself as a storyteller. Oh, you're muted.
You know what? I tell everyone I do that exactly once or twice every panel without fail. So I'm just gonna. You mentioned that directing is 90% acting. So there's a question here about what that process was like. So what was the casting process like, and what drew you to these fantastic actresses, and also the supporting characters. Everything was extremely good. I think sometimes. This is a personal belief of mine as I watch films, is that you may nail their two leads, but everything else, like those supporting characters, even people that come in with like 7 or 8 lines, or maybe they're aside, they are absolutely like just as important, because like it's distracting when a performance lags.
Absolutely.
So getting consistently great performances means a very, possibly very detailed casting process, probably sifting through thousands and thousands of potential applicants. How did you do this?
That and a lot of luck, because very often you just don't get the people that you want to cast. They say no, they're not available, or whatever else happens. These days, they test positive, and you have to replace them, the day before you shoot or something, and positive for COVID. But we had a very, very fortunate process. Also worked with a great casting director, Henry Russell Bergstein. But also, we're very lucky that the right actors that we loved so much responded for the roles, the lead roles, and also other roles. I'll start with the lead roles. It's funny, Lily Taylor, we've watched for years in films, and she thought she was so good and really wanted to kind of. I remember even before we ever thought about a screenplay, we have to find something, I remember writing other projects and being like, oh, maybe Lily Taylor would be good for this one. Maybe we should be. And above all, I remember watching, I think it was season 2 of American Crime. She just gave one of the best performances I remember seeing on TV. Just a performance that reminds you what acting really is when you see like great acting, and you're reminded that a lot of what you've seen up until now wasn't really the real thing, and then you watch the real thing and you're like, oh wow, that was great. So I remember seeing it and just feeling like, wow, we have to cast her in something. And then when we wrote this project, we just felt like, wow, we really need an actress who can dial up to 100, because I mean, this takes a performer with that level of commitment. And we went to Lily, and we're so grateful that she said yes and loved the project. It was so wonderful to collaborate with. They were really, really lucky. And if she had said no or wasn't available, I don't know, very possibly we would have gone with an actress who wasn't quite as good, and maybe the movie, wouldn't be, very likely the movie wouldn't be as good as a result. So there was casting Lily. But then as for Stefania, we didn't know Stefania before. We didn't see her work. We didn't really know of her. And a lot of girls auditioned for the role, and many of them were really good, but for some reason just wasn't it. And especially because in many ways the role is a reflection of Natalie, and we so knew the character. We so knew someone who needed to, even if not physically look the same, obviously needed to in spirit kind of embodies the gist of what we saw in the character. And a lot of girls auditioned, and many of them were good, but for some reason just wasn't it. And especially after you watch so many auditions, you start doubting yourself, and you're like, maybe we're being too picky, maybe. And then another good actress who was very, very good, but a little bit older for the role. The role is 17, and I think the other actress was 27. It was very good. It was the best that we've seen in auditions up to that point. But we said she just lacks that naivete of age 17. It just felt like she just has the sophistication of a 30-year-old, not of a 17 or 18-year-old. So, but she was still the best of everyone that we've seen, and we're almost about to cast her. I think we already told her agent, which is very sad because I'm sure we broke her heart. But we already told her agent, just wait for an offer tomorrow. And then Stefania's audition came in, and I don't even know what number it was. We've seen so many girls up to that point. It was a recorded audition, and I believe I was in the office and Natalie was in the bedroom, and it came late at night. We both happened to watch at the same time, and we both felt like we have our Melanie. It was just spot on, and had so much sweetness and charm, and and great acting and empathy, which is how you started the conversation. And that is a quality that is so interesting, because some actors really evoke empathy, and it's a quality that's separate from great acting. I feel like you have a lot of great actors who are maybe fascinating to watch, but they don't really evoke empathy. And some people just have that in spades, like Stefania. I mean, you watch her, and beyond how convincing she is in the movie, just your heart breaks for her, and it was just so real and honest and natural. And like Lily, she was such a pleasure to work with, and put her heart into the movie, and we're so grateful that she and Lily connected so well. And then Ian Nelson, who plays the boyfriend,
Mm-hmm.
Daniel, was just wonderful, and just gave both a lot of charm. Also handled a role that on one hand had some like charm and humor, but on the other hand also had a darker side of addiction, and we felt he handled it beautifully. And then Peyton brought in a lot of charm and comedy to it that we felt like the movie really needed, and it was a beautiful addition to the cast. And then all of our other actors as well, Tom Papa and David Rashi, Max Fasella plays the detective, and Michael Searle Creighton, and everyone we worked with was just so right for the roles. And some of them we haven't really known before, but once we just saw them in other movies, we're just like, oh wow, that would be perfect. And luckily they said yes. And then Tom Papa, who plays Howard, is just our favorite comedian. And I remember thinking at some point, wouldn't it be funny if we cast like Tom Papa? And wouldn't it just be great? Like, I mean, we just, we sit and watch his, stand-up comedy, and it's just hilarious. Yeah, I think we should go to Tom Papa. And I would say that's really one of the greatest luxuries of making a movie, that you're like, I like this person for this role, and they say yes. And you're like, oh wow, this is a dream come true. So the process was wonderful, and I so agree with you that even sometimes people who have one line in a movie, if they're not good enough actors or not right for the roles, it just kills the scene. I've seen that. I've been there with my own projects, and it's just sometimes with the best intentions, that person who has one line and is almost an extra, that one line just feels fake and the scene dies.
Yeah, it's the most articulate way that I've ever heard film described. And I don't know if you will appreciate this analogy, but I have a sense you might, is that it's like a sailboat that is sailing through the water and navigating a set course. And that every compromise that is made through laziness, bad acting, bad editing, bad sound, bad music choice, etc., tears the sail just a little bit. And as the captain continues to try to drive the boat to the point, the boat no longer functions according to the wheel because the sail has broken. So great films, in fact, are so rare, and we had people on yesterday who were saying, any film is a miracle. Yes, it is, and absolutely true. And I didn't appreciate this when I started out. I absolutely appreciate it now. It is a huge accomplishment to complete a film. To any emerging filmmakers watching this right now, please, if you complete a film, please pat yourself on the back and go to sleep, and just give yourself a praise, because it's a very hard thing to do. But to make a film that even approaches masterful level requires 5 million decisions to go right, and very few to go wrong. So yeah. I think that's a commendable thing that you were able to accomplish here. But then I think it also speaks to probably the detail of the script and how clearly you envisioned this, because I think that clarity of vision is what allows you to slot things into place. If things are messy in your head and things are not organized and sorted of like, who is this character going to be? It's like you could feel who that character is going to be, who her boyfriend is going to be, who this the school staff are going to be. You had vision for, and then I think the casting becomes maybe a little bit easier. We have a few compliments. Oh, sorry. Oh, we have a comment here. Question. Great film. I'm curious if it was intentional to insinuate that Melanie might have the potential to become like her mother in the bathroom scene where she's high and seeing / hearing things.
Yeah, good question. First of all, thank you, ATG. I'm glad you enjoyed the movie. There was the secondary intention, I think, with that fear, that you might have something that your parent has is a very natural one. But above all, we felt like the experience of going through it and being in her shoes and feeling what paranoia feels like would create a growth in empathy, which to us was the most important thing in the scene. Yeah, the fear was definitely exaggerated by the fact that she knew firsthand what it's like to be paranoid. So having the same sense of paranoia was even more alarming. But we felt like to really experience, because so much of empathy is such a key word, I think, with this story, and the ability to empathize with someone who otherwise could seem extremely difficult and someone that you would want to be around, and being able to understand their suffering and what they're going through, and the fact that this is their reality, even though it's unreal, takes a lot of empathy. So we wanted Melanie's journey to also be one of growing in empathy, and that was one of the scenes that created that. By the way, just to respond to the last thing you said, first of all, it's such a beautifully eloquent analogy, and so true. And part of what's so hard is that there are always compromises. I mean, there's always, you never have, your budget is never, big enough. You never have enough time. You never have enough of everything. You always constantly make compromises. I think that someone even called it directing the art of compromise. But I think that you need to be very aware of what's important and what isn't, because you're going to end up, losing a lot of things that seem so precious. But knowing what you can afford to cut and what you can't, which scenes you can afford to say, well, you know what, that take was good enough, moving on, even though it wasn't perfect, or no, we need to do it again. Very often, for whatever reasons, usually just time, and not so much with performance, because really I think that our actors did a phenomenal job in the movie, much more to their credit than to mine. I mean, I feel, again, when you cast well, I think and the actors understand what the characters are and what they're going through. You don't really need to direct them too much. You don't need to really, they get it. It's good to remind them where they were before, where the city is going, what you're trying to do with it. But beyond that, let them be. But very often, especially with time, shots that are a little bit more evolved and require equipment that is not working, or it's starting to rain and you just don't have time for another take. Very often, mostly I would say with silent shots, that are not performance shots, but with cinematography moments, you just wish you had one more take, that would, have an even smoother kind of a steady cam move that would blend exactly as you hoped. And sometimes you're like, okay, moving on. At the end of the day, that's not the most important thing. So I think that being able to know where to make the compromises. We cut a few scenes on set, but again, because of time, locations falling through and all that. But we kind of knew, okay, these are scenes that we can afford to cut. Or some moments were like, no, these moments we have to get this shot, we have to get, there's no way, okay, if we have to go into overtime, we're going to overtime. This is a must. So being able to know, where to compromise and where you mustn't, I think is part of the art of it.
We have a pattern emerging at this film festival that is strange and it's not intentional by any means, but someone told us today that it seems Saturday Night deals with this issue of mental illness. I have no idea where this came from, but I checked our records and it's true. In 2019, we had a film called To the Night, in which a man is so haunted by his own demons that he literally tries to kill his brain to reset it. And that was a very polarizing film, very polarized. People walked out, straight up, walked out of the theater, and the director said, "It's okay." That's an expected response, and I like that. What is the I hate the fact that we are bringing films to Canada for the first time and not getting to meet the directors in a more meaningful way. I spent literally, I'll take a minute out of this interview to just communicate with you how we did this, because I spent all year telling people we would never do this. We will never go virtual. We're not going to do this. We will go anywhere, everywhere. We considered going to Croatia and doing the festival over there, but everything is so unpredictable. You never know. You set everything up. You spend $50,000, and then it falls apart last second. You're out. And we started to embrace this idea of, hey, we will be able to connect with people. But more so than our struggle, I think about filmmakers, because I think there are certain films, and I told Adam this last night, I'll tell you this tonight as well. There are certain films that cling to a crowd, and they develop a lifer following, like that. I'm sure as a filmmaker you can tell me there's a film you watched at 12 that you would never need to watch again to remember every scene of it. There's something, the resonance of that moment stays for life. And I think this is the type of film that can do that for a lot of people that have been affected, but also not a lot of, even people who are not affected. I don't even like the branding of this to say that this is a film for people who have been affected by mental illness or whatever. I think this is so broadly applicable to anyone. And there's so much mental illness that is not diagnosed. People who have certain autism, neuroses, things like that, this generational trauma that results in people being violent, people being prone to addictions, etc. All of these things, I think, forge a great divide between mother and daughter, or parent and child, and create great, identities, should I say crisis, not identity crisis, identity problems for the child who's having to identify that this is what I come from, this is what I may become. There's a very thoughtful one that is all, I'm going to try not to cry. It's just very, okay. I would read it out loud for anyone who's hearing impaired. Thank you for this movie. Similar illness befell my mother when I was really young, making our relationship very strained. It was amazing to see through your movie that she was a normal person with a life and capable of better connection. Your movie really helped me reflect on my relationship with her and try to view her in a different light.
Thank you very, very much for that note. That is really a big reason why we chose to tell this story, and also to be open about the fact that this movie is based on truth. I wish Natalie was here to see this note. We have 3 kids, and it's still before their bedtime, so I wanted to watch them. So but I'll relay the message to her. But thank you. Natalie often said that she wishes she had seen this movie as she was going through it. The very least, in order to feel less alone in the experience of going through it, and she wasn't as alone as Melanie. She was married. She already had 2 children at the time. Now we have 3, and she was herself a therapist, a professional. So she came to that moment a lot more prepared, and yet there's something very, very lonely in the experience of, why is this happening to me? Why is my parent hit with this, cancer of the mind in a way. And we were really, really hoping that people especially people who are personally touched by this, or care for a loved one with some form of mental illness, would watch this and feel a little comforted by the fact that there's an echo to their experience on screen. So I'm really grateful for that note. Thank you.
Yeah, and I could probably say something very similar to you about my own experience with my parents and how much this film can help me re-perspectivize what they were going through, because it's very difficult to understand as a child, why is my mother always late? Why is my mother always different? Why is my mother not able to do things that other people's mothers? There's a fascinating thing that I discovered the other day, and every time I tell someone this, they say, that's true, but I've never thought of that we are angry at people when they die. There's a subtle anger, and because it is a disappointment to us. So I think it's if we're angry at least partly at people who die, then we must on some level be a little bit angry at people who are struggling
Yeah.
as well, because it does impact our life as well. So I think that that's an important thing to realize. But how, you're not a psychologist, I'm not a psychologist, we're, you know, film people talking about film, but as a human being, what would be, you know, because you've probably learned so much about this, not only through your wife, but also through writing this script and probably researching it so much. What would be your message to someone out there who's watched this film and said, this feels too close to reality, this is my relationship with my parents?
Fortunately, I have so much to say to that, and thank you for that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of resources that are much better at suggesting how one should deal with these problems, much better than any advice that I could, you know, even pertain to offer. But I would say that I mean, we've learned from, specifically with this problem of paranoia, we've learned, we knew in advance that confronting it head on, telling someone who's paranoid, listen, we think that we love you, we think that you have a problem, and we think that you need help, does not work. It's extremely hard. I feel like maybe it's one of the hardest forms of mental illness, because the person lacks the insight to the fact that they have a problem, because they believe that the problem is exterior. So while I do think that there are things that Melanie does in the story that are useful, saying, is it possible, and apparently my wife says that that's also kind of like a common question in therapy, is it possible that what you heard could be explained by something else? Is it possible that what you think may have a different explanation? Gently, is, while it doesn't solve the problem, it's more effective in trying to prevent an escalation than telling someone, even in the sweetest of ways, listen, we love you, but we think that you have a problem, a mental problem, and you need help. That's I mean, and we knew in advance that it's not the way to go, and probably for about a year, since the problem became very serious, we held ourselves from being from confronting it head on, and try to find ways to dance around it gently, and then probably about a year later, we said, listen, you know, we think we love you, but we think that you have a problem and you need help. And the relationship took a nosedive from that point on. So I would say that confronting it head on doesn't seem to work. It is good to try to not, definitely not encourage it, but suggest, you know, there may be other explanations, and try to and look for resources in your communities, in your, you know, NAMI. I mean, I'm less familiar with resources in Canada, but I know that in the US, National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, has a lot of resources that are very, very useful, and maybe if we had known some of those before, you know, it would have been things would have been, you know, better. Even I remember the last festival that hosted us was in Anchorage, the Anchorage International Film Festival, and NAMI and the director of NAMI Anchorage participated in the conversation, and he said they're actually now having like mobile units, like mobile crisis units, who show up when someone is going through a psychotic episode or something like that, trying to help. So there are external resources to rely on that are very easy to find online, and maybe not that easy, but are worth seeking. And to go back to what you said before, which was very insightful and very sad, I would say that's part of the role of movies, activism aside. I think that part of what's so fascinating about movies is that we're also locked into our own experience and our own identity and our own perspective on life. That's part of the beauty of movies, is that they allow us to take on the perspective of someone else who may be very different from us. Clearly, you know, gender, race, life experience, but also is going through things that, you know, could be very, very opposite to our experience, and sometimes even the experience of both a mother and a daughter, you know, who are seeing things from polar points of view. So I think that if a movie can help people gain empathy, especially if it has something to say, then it's done. It did something right.
You said earlier that we're asking you the best questions, and I'm feeling a sense of pressure that before I ask any question, please God, don't ask him a question. I often do research filmmakers that we talk to make sure that I'm not asking questions that you've already answered, because people do tend to ask all the same questions, and you don't want someone having to repeat themselves, because obviously at some point down the line, I imagine that someone is going to become fanatically obsessed with this film. This type of fanaticism exists for a very small pocket of films, and is only possible for only a small pocket of films. There's so many films out there. I was alluding to it earlier as the consistent sevens, like films that can only ever generate a 7 response, and they generally do. They don't polarize. They don't offend. They don't provoke. They don't do anything. But films that do have that ability to polarize an audience, maybe something is too uncomfortable, or that they have a chance to develop what I would call like fanaticism. And so I imagine always that one day someone will look you up and watch every interview you ever did, and hate me if I ask you all the same questions that you've already answered.
This would probably be the most interesting one.
Oh,
I'm afraid if that person exists in the future, they'd be bored. I did answer many of the same questions repeatedly, but I was grateful for that. I mean, I think that there are obvious questions to be asked when a new audience watches the movie, and most of them most likely don't go look up at the filmmaker's other Q&As. So I'm always happy to answer them again. But we definitely hit some very interesting points in this conversation that that haven't been brought up before. So I'm grateful for that.
No, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you took the time to do this, and like, as much as I absolutely despise the fact, like as I said, I was bringing up a point before, and then I stopped short and I brought up the question. But the audience response to this live, now you had a chance to exhibit this live, not for long, or
I actually, when the film played live, it played live in a theater in Boston at the Boston Film Festival, but it was a 25% capacity, or maybe it was limited to 25 people, and I felt like flying to Boston during the pandemic and taking up 2 of those seats seemed frivolous. But and also Warsaw Film Festival, and I believe those were the only 2. But I actually have not yet had a chance to see the film live, other than a test screening that we did as we were cutting the movie, just to see people's reactions. But it wasn't finished film. But we're releasing the movie on May 7th in theaters in the US and online VOD. So hopefully in one of the theaters in LA, I'll get to watch it live with people, and that would be an interesting experience after playing the movie virtually for a year. That would be very exciting.
No, I think that everyone who made movies in 2018, 2019, and obviously, I'm curious, when did you start writing the script?
I think we wrote it at the very end of 2018, went into production in 2019, and there was an exceptionally fast process. First of all, the majority of projects never get made. They never get the financing, they never get the cast, and if they do, it's usually, oh yeah, we wrote this 7 years ago, and then and then it died for a few years, and then somehow it was rekindled. But like you said, I mean, just being able to get for the stars to align, just for a movie to happen, let alone happen right, seems like a miracle.
It is totally a miracle, and I hope that everyone who watched it today will connect to some level with this film when it goes online, because I think that that's perhaps the task, the mission, the purpose of film festivals is that people can discover these types of films that may not have billion-dollar budgets to just blow up the airplay, but no billion-dollar budget. Okay, but they are important films, and they are films that can effectively, I always say, like they could make people see their life differently, as opposed to just fill up an evening or fill up a weekend. And it's a really important film that you've made here, and so we're honored. We're so happy that we were able to squeeze this in last second. That was very stressful. Please don't ever do that to us again. No, we loved this film. Like it was truly one of, it was literally we said it actually when we tried to program it, that it was our favorite. It was one of our favorite films of the year. Not the favorite films that we were considering. It was one of our favorite films of the year. Period. And the idea of not having it was like, oh, I can't tell. It was the most stressful 3-4 days trying to reach out. And to anyone watching, I think we must have emailed 4 times, 3 times. We called, we Googled, we almost considered looking up a directory to get in touch with your distributor to like, how can we do this? Because sometimes this happens. A film falls through the cracks because the rights change from one hand to another. And I was like, oh my God, like we've been building on this thematically for many years, and this film is such a perfect thing for our audience. So thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much for showing the film and screening it to your audience. I'm really grateful that this was our Canadian premiere. I do believe that the movie should come to theaters as well in Canada at some point, as well as VOD. But there's no announcement yet. But I'm really grateful that we could show it to at least some Canadian audiences. And
yeah, absolutely. And I think you know, one of the things that we always try to do is we support the life of the film. So we will be talking. If you have an update about this film in 2038, this will still be something that we will like. I think at some point we're gonna have to like realize like this is not possible to continue to do this because you know we still talk about films that are going online that we selected in 2017 and like, oh, this is premiere. So it's like, okay, well so I think the part for us of why we do this is because it makes us really picky about the films that we pick. It's like marrying a film and saying, okay, so you're gonna pick this film, now you're gonna pick this filmmaker. Now, if that filmmaker is like doing something 10 years from now, you still have to support it. So pick wisely, pick well, you know? So it forces our programming staff to be very deliberate. So thank you so much. And you know what, we will send an email link the minute the film is released to everyone who's subscribed. We will blast it on social media and we will let you know. And Inon will let us know so that you know, and we will tell you, and we will hammer you, and we'll make sure that you tell your friends about it, and make sure that more people get to see this film and are touched by this film. Thank you. And please give our regards to your wife.
Will do.
And your kids. Okay. Take care.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Cheers. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.